What's going on, folks? This is your host, Undead FOIA, and this is a show we're going to call FOIA Round and Find Out. And if you're familiar with us from Twitter, you've obviously been following us for probably about a year. We've done a lot of Spaces chats where through Twitter we'll get together and we'll discuss different events that are going on. But this is sort of the next evolution where we're going to make an attempt and see how it goes on YouTube and Rumble and take our Spaces chats to the next level. In this format, we're able to share some documents, so it's really exciting, and we are excited to try this out. So, for those of you that are unfamiliar with us, if you haven't heard of us before, we're not certainly not famous, but we've been working behind the scenes for a number of years now, primarily researching Russiagate. And while you may not be familiar with us by name, you probably, if you've been following the Russiagate narrative, you've probably heard of some of the stuff that we've helped break. We were the ones that ID'd Igor Danchenko. We ID'd Rodney Joffe. We got a hold of some transcripts from Strzok and Page and dumped those out there. More recently, and this story is still developing, we discovered that some of the same researchers that were connected to the Alpha Bank allegations apparently went on and worked for Special Counsel Mueller, and indications are they actually had a role in attribution for the DNC hack. So that's going to be a developing story, and that's going to be something we're going to be watching and paying attention to in the coming months. As far as this format goes, not looking to monetize anything. We don't foresee that coming down the line at all. We're not going to have ads on here. So we're not going to do a whole lot of scripting. And sometimes that works to our advantage, and sometimes maybe that won't work to our advantage. Whenever there's a big event, maybe there's a John Durham report that comes out, or maybe we get a hold of some FOIA documents, or whatever the case might be, we'll generally try to do a chat that night. And that way we can get to the news as it happens. We're also discussing going back and revisiting some of those older topics with some pre-recorded videos. And we'll see how that goes. That'll depend quite a bit on who's available and how far we want to get into this. But tonight, I thought it was a good opportunity to kind of introduce ourselves and kick things off on our first ever video chat. And happy to have MB here. Been a researcher with us for a long time now. And MB, if you want to introduce yourself, maybe talk about how you kind of got started with us and what you're looking forward to.
Yeah, sounds great. Make sure my mic's up here. Yeah, this is MB, and I guess I've been hanging around a few years here as well. Little background of how I got into this, probably pretty similar to a lot of people. I think the election in 2016 always seemed contentious as far as all the Russia stuff going around, and it never really sat well after, I guess, years of ClimateGate, all the stuff with the Iraq war and the uranium and all. And I think a lot of years of just learning not to believe everything you were told at face value, especially from the FBI. So yeah, I guess like a lot of you, I was really raising eyebrows and having doubts, and then starting to go and do research for myself based on, what a lot of the guys had already done, and going, yeah, you know what, that's messed up. That doesn't sound right. And a lot of this stuff just didn't pass the smell test. And then when you start digging yourself and looking at the documents firsthand, you don't have to jump to conclusions. You can say, look, this is absolutely true, and they're trying to gaslight us. And I think especially with the Steele dossier stuff, that was a big part of all this, when we were lied to about where it came from, and they said you're conspiracy theorist if you think that the Clintons were involved. And lo and behold, they certainly were. They funded the whole thing, and we were straight up lied to. So that was kind of for me where it really kicked off, and I was like, all right, there's stuff here. Let's find out why they're lying, because that's probably as interesting as what the lies are about.
Yeah, I think I sort of had the same experience, and actually, back in 2016 and going into 2017, I was on the fence, quite honestly. I mean, I was somebody that watched CNN every night, and they had the narrative on every single night. And my line of thinking at the time was really that how could everybody be wrong? I mean, every station was coming on and they said, we have 5 anonymous sources, and literally some of those stories they put out were just that they had 5 or 6 anonymous sources that were all saying, there's validity to these allegations that Trump colluded with Russia. And then around the time that General Flynn resigned, I really thought, okay, there is something there. And, I generally followed it for a while there. I was pretty disgusted with the whole situation. But then around the time, and it was October 2017, that we found out that Hillary Clinton paid for the dossier, that's when I really started sort of engaging with this a little bit. And I started following it on Twitter. And into 2018, as we got the Nunez memo, that's when really it started picking up for me, because that's when there really was a counter narrative that was starting to develop. And people that had actually looked at documents like Devin Nunez and Kash Patel were saying, no, like there's some real problems here. And I think I stumbled across Undercover Huber, who's always a fantastic account. And the things that he was saying were not lining up at all with what was being reported in the news. And I would go to his Twitter account, and he was calling out things that you just couldn't defend. I mean, he was calling out these starkly, these issues and these problems with some of the papers and the documents that were coming out, and nothing just added up. And so I think there was a couple of years there where I was just following people. I was retweeting people, but I wasn't necessarily doing a whole lot of research. And then it was probably in 2020, around the time that we identified Igor Danchenko, that's when the gears started turning for me a little bit. And then certainly into 2021, I became much more engaged in actually doing independent research, and started my process of putting in FOIAs and open records requests. And now I'm here about a year later. I think I put in something like 300, and we've been able to get some documents out of those. So that's been good. Sort of built a little platform and found this group. I mean, it's just amazing the crowdsourcing that we're able to do, whether it's identifying Igor Danchenko or whatever the case might be. Come on here and work with you and work with Full Nelson or Walk of Fire or some of these other guys, or Technofog. I mean, a lot of people, there's a lot of followers of these individual accounts, but the ability to tag team certain issues and work off of each other is just really, really powerful, because there's so many things that are wrong. There's so many things that don't make sense. And it's impossible for one person to actually understand everything and follow every piece of what's going on. So being able to send a direct message to Walk of Fire or some of these other guys that'll definitely be on in future streams, it's just so helpful to bounce some ideas off of them. And then, we've gained a little bit of a following as well. And I think all of us appreciate that, being able to share some of those ideas. So that's been exciting. And that's sort of the basis of how we started doing these chats. We talk every day and bouncing ideas off of each other, and we thought we would share some of these ideas. So I see we have Kingmaker in the chat too. I don't know, King, if you want to introduce yourself and kind of talk about some of your experience. You don't have to talk, but
can you hear me?
Sure.
Yeah,
Can.
there you go.
Hey, King.
Okay. I have very little to add. You guys invited me to the group. I've lost track of time, but a couple of years ago, and it's an amazing group. I've learned so much from everybody, and contributed a little bit, but mostly I learned.
No, I would say, I mean, you are one of the resident lawyers in this corner, and in real life practice, fantastic lawyer, and drawing on some of your experience has been invaluable, especially as we discuss the Sussman trial and the Danchenko trial and some of these different legal theories. It's been so great to have you in some of these chats, and I've certainly leaned on you in a lot of them, just for your ability to carry some of those chats.
Well, I appreciate the kind words, but I'm a novice when it comes to all this electronic stuff, and what you guys do with what I perceive as
Nope. Do we lose you there?
Oh, I think we lost you there, Kingmaker.
you hear me now?
We got you.
Okay,
Yeah,
sorry. I was just complimenting the group, but I'll turn it over.
All righty. Well, yeah, I appreciate you stopping in. And obviously, we'll have more speakers that hop on periodically, and that's going to be sort of the format of these chats, especially when we go live. However long we might go, and certainly if there's breaking news, we might go for 4 or 5 hours, and through the course of those hours, we'll have new speakers come on whenever they free up, and you're not going to want to miss it, because at various times we just have tremendous speakers that come on and share their experience and their ideas. So with that being said, I mean, there's a couple things that happened today, and we can talk about all of them, or we can talk about other issues. So the first thing that I saw today was, obviously we have the indictment out there, but we also have Rodney Joffe, who is Tech Executive 1 from the Sussman indictment, who was involved in the Alpha Bank allegations, and more recently, we believe, and it's our understanding, that he actually has a significant role in the DNC hack attribution. He's actually gone back and he's sued Newstar, who was his employer during this whole period, and he's seeking $2.6 million for his legal costs, alleging that companies in effect responsible for the legal risk that he had in some capacity, that the various CEOs were aware of what he was doing and undertaking, and they approved and directed some of that activity. So that goes back to CEOs like Lisa Hook, and we have some open records documents that have her with some pretty interesting conversations. So that is pretty notable today, and thank you to Charlie Savage at the New York Times for pulling this document. I was in the docket a couple weeks ago, and it's pretty expensive. It was hard to find, first of all. But then the individual documents were like $100 a piece. So it was really great. Apparently, he petitioned the judge to unseal this complaint from Rodney Joffe. So that was good. And being able to see and read this document, it's 34 pages long, and it's available on Charlie's Twitter feed. I'll try to link that if I can. MB, I don't know if you have any thoughts on the Joffe filing, or if you just want to head right into the indictment.
Sure. I find it interesting that Newstar is apparently not covering Joffe's legal expenses when it comes to the Durham investigation. I guess he was also the Trump sued him. I think that lawsuit's defunct at this point, but and the Alpha Bank, which is obviously was shut down when Russia invaded Ukraine, and I don't know, they chased that company out of the country or something. So obviously, Newstar has its own questions about whether Joffe was working on behalf of the company, or that is how it would seem. And Joffe is making the claim that he was working on the company's behalf. Reading through the filing, I think there's some question marks. If you look at some of the Sussman evidence and what came out in that trial, I think he's putting on a very happy face about his part in things, and what he claims he did and why he did it versus perhaps what some of the exhibits say. So we could probably take a look at that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's so much going on. We have Senator Wyden out there who released a letter on Newstar about a month ago, just calling into question the basic steps of them selling data to Georgia Tech from their presumably unwitting customers who may not want to have their data sold to Georgia Tech. But then Georgia Tech apparently taking this relationship with Newstar under contracts with the Department of Defense, and they're data mining it and they're analyzing it for various purposes related to cybersecurity. So it's pretty interesting. There wasn't anything that was a real bombshell. I think this part's probably important. NSS and subsidiary ERP essentially spun out of Neustar, and they're separated now. So this was a special subsidiary of Neustar ERP Services, and that was doing exclusively working with the government, sensitive contracts, classified information, and apparently Neustar no longer has that practice. So that might be a positive. But as it relates to what information might develop in the future, more related to John Durham, it might be something to do with ERP services. That might be something to watch as we progress through this whole situation. And then as far as this lawsuit goes, a lot of the docket, a lot of the important docket is still sealed. So we'll keep an eye on it. A lot of the other exhibits, they're not necessarily value add. The ones that we can get to, they're just expensive exhibits that don't necessarily contribute a whole lot. So we'll keep an eye on it. MB or King, if you guys have anything else on this.
The one thing I did want to say about the entire Georgia Tech enterprise that we should mention is this was being funded by the Department of Defense through DARPA. So that's something that still sits badly with me, and I'm sure that some people in Congress know a lot about this already. It's been funded, but I'm hoping that this causes them to take another look, because we're talking about surveillance that is very domestic in some of its nature, that is being paid for by the military, and that is probably not something that should ever happen. I know that it's also being used for these international either terrorists they're looking at, or obviously spies from our adversaries. But we're in a different age now where what's overseas and what's domestic is really not easy to separate. And we're having enough trouble keeping the FBI out of or doing criminal investigations instead of concentrating on these counterintelligence investigations that never end up in court of law. And the CIA is never supposed to be doing this line's gotten very blurred. And that's really worrisome to me. Quite aside from what the threat is, this could be used, by somebody underhanded trying to affect our domestic situation and our politics, and that seems to be what's happened. So this isn't theoretical anymore. This is, it happened immediately. So I'm really concerned about this, and I hope that in the long run, Congress can really rethink whether this is a good idea.
I think that's a great point that you make. I mean, the contract at issue is a Ramnuja contract. That's the program name at the Department of Defense, and it's within the DARPA sub-agency. And it was effective in November 2016. And these researchers had gotten some early access, apparently. That's been alleged in Durham filings. And the first thing they did with this contract, with their first access that they got, was they went and they mined for dirt against a political rival. Essentially, they looked for dirt on President Trump. And you have to look into, there's so many different tentacles of this. You go over to BitVoyant, where Joffe has an ownership interest, and he's tasking Jared Novick to essentially go deep and go wide with basically everything that relates to President Trump or his campaign associates and his family. And it's like, is this really the purpose of what the Department of Defense is going to be about? And then on the other angle, we have a number of FOIA documents now that we've obtained where the Department of Defense and the FBI are going to DARPA. They're going to the Department of Defense to solicit information for domestic investigations. And that's not specific to Russiagate. That is apparently a much more widespread practice. We saw that in the Tree of Life synagogue shooting, where the tasking came down from the Department of Justice and it went to the Department of Defense. And within a couple hours, the Department of Defense had tasked Manos and Tanakakis at Georgia Tech to go and look at this individual's online history. And that blows my mind that, you could, one, run this to the Department of Defense, but then two, you're going to have, university researchers, private contractors, however you want to classify it, running these inquiries. And I think Senator Wyden had a really important letter a few weeks ago, because it doesn't appear that they're obtaining warrants for a lot of this inquiries. I mean, nobody's getting their constitutional rights under the Fourth Amendment. They're presuming that all this DNS activity is just publicly available information, and it's really not. I mean, we have a presumption of privacy for what we do online, and you don't have to go through too many examples before you understand that, because whatever somebody's going through in their life, what they type into Google might be deeply personal to them, and you wouldn't want to have just anybody looking at that and figuring out what's going on, because it's not just anonymous metadata out there. It is deeply personal information. There's NetFlow data. There's a little bit of everything that seems to be going on within the Department of Defense, and that's deeply, deeply concerning.
Yeah, and the fact that these aren't trained FBI agents necessarily. These aren't Department of Justice lawyers, and those guys are really nowhere around. They're tasking this out. It's going through a couple of parties before it gets to these, God bless them, these computer scientists at Georgia Tech, and they're being given instructions by these tech guys that have no training in civil rights either, and they're just told, go find out for us. Well, that would never fly. We would hope at least the FBI gets instructions on what's legal and what's not legal, and what Fourth Amendment issues. And there's just no way the guys at Georgia Tech, that's even on their radar screen. If you've read their emails via FOIA that are available now and things like that, it just never really even, it comes up in the sense of, is what we're doing necessarily legal? But they're not even like asking questions. Is it ethical? Is this should we be doing this? That never seemed to, maybe you've read a lot more of that than I did, but I never got the sense that they asked, is this right or wrong? Occasionally they'd ask if it was legal, but just the ethics of it never seemed to occur to them.
On the contrary, I think there's one email I can picture quite clearly right now where they actually go the other way. And it was in a Durham filing where they're actually saying, we have to pull out all the tools out of our tool bag just to make a weak attribution. But then they go on in that same paragraph and they say, we're going to have to explain to privacy nut jobs how we did this. And it's like they have no regard for what they're looking at and what they're doing and the impact on the lives of the people that are around this thing. You could look at people individually, because we know there's this list of Trump associates out there, and we don't know to what extent the Georgia Tech researchers were on that. But certainly some of these other private entity researchers had this list of Trump associates. And you've got people like Carter Page on it. You've got people like Sergey Milian on it, who is not really associated with Trump, by the way. But it's like, oh yeah, just look for all the information you can on Carter Page. And that's deeply, deeply concerning. I mean, we're not talking about opposition research anymore. We're talking about, how can I hurt these people in such a manner that I can impact them politically?
Well, Trump's family was on these lists, and things were coming up on that. If you're looking at DNS coming out of somebody's network at their home or their residence or whatever it is, that's not necessarily the person you're looking at. That could be their 13-year-old son. That could be their wife, their mother. Who knows? This, like you say, this stuff is deeply personal, and I think the law is pretty far behind it. I'm not going to necessarily say that this was illegal, but I think the question of it, whether it should be illegal, is the question that needs to be pursued now, because the law is so far behind the technology. And I'm sure your average congressman does not understand this stuff. It's not really simple things, but it could be explained to them in a way that they would understand.
Absolutely. I think you and I are in complete agreement on that. And for all these Congress members that talk about, getting revenge or whatever you want to call it on big tech. Well, if you have a data privacy law that inhibits their ability to freely sell our data, collect and mine our data, that's going to be a huge hit to their bottom line. And, whoever's taking campaign money from big tech companies, they're going to get a lot of pressure. They're going to get a lot of pressure to vote against the data privacy law. But to your point, we need to catch up to the technology of today. Talking about the Fourth Amendment protections, 150 years ago, the Fourth Amendment, you're talking about what you had on your person, maybe what you had in the saddlebags on your horse. You're not talking about like a cell phone that you have years and years of information on, and you're using on a 15 hours a day or whatever the case might be, and it's going to have all your information that you can extract on that. So
Yeah.
Not to beat a dead horse on that, but
agree. And the one more thing I want to sort of mention about the Georgia Tech enhanced attribution program, if you take Durham seriously and the indictment he laid out of Sussman, you're going to get a different story than what Rodney Jaffe and others are trying to tell. They would want to have you believe that we have this amazing tool that's being used, against foreign adversaries and so forth. And this information bubbled up about Donald Trump, and it came to light, and they got really worried about it because it threw, this computer just spit it out at them. And that apparently is, at least according to Durham and everything that we've seen, that is absolutely not what happened. They fed the name Donald Trump in to find connections to Russia. It didn't come from this pool of data naturally. So, you're going to hear that if you listen to these guys and what their kind of excuses are, that, well, we had to do something. Well, did you do the same thing for Hillary Clinton? Did you do the same thing for anybody on the other side of the aisle and find out if just putting this name plus Russia spits back things? And of course they didn't do that. They had a political agenda and they executed it.
You're exactly right. And their narrative really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And you look at this group and their experience and their connections, they have deep connections to all levels of law enforcement and intelligence communities. If they had an idea, even if they weren't sure, they say, it could be a communication server. I don't really know. They have plenty of people. They could pick up the phone and say, hey, I found something that's a little bit strange. I don't really know what to make of it. It's hitting the server. It's named Trump organization or whatever it was. I think it was Trump email or something. I think you should check it out. And that's it. You could do that with one phone call. And all these guys have the clout that anybody they speak to they're going to do it. They're absolutely going to pick up the phone and take that phone call, and they're going to look into it. And when they actually looked into these allegations, the data didn't even support the allegations that were being made because it's a non-technical interpretation of DNS lookups. Somehow you have to really, be quite out there to just form a narrative that it represents a communications channel. And that's something that's really disturbing. Instead of just saying, hey, I found some pretty weird DNS activity, they said, no, it's a communications channel. And this is what's going on. And that's really concerning because then they hid behind pseudonyms and went to the media. They went to Slate, they went to the New Yorker, I believe they went to the CNN. And it's like, why don't you just stand up as, somebody with integrity and say, this is what I think is going on. This is my name. You put my name behind it. I think it's worth investigating. And then you don't have to go back again and again to media organizations. You don't have to go back to Congress over and over, or law enforcement agencies, or go flag down the CIA as they did. Any of these researchers, if they put their name down and say, I think this is what is happening, absolutely, they would have investigated it. And very troubling, once they did investigate it, the conclusions from the FBI, the CIA, the independent IT companies that looked at it, the independent analysts that look at it, I mean, their conclusions are all negative. They're very, very negative. From the data was fraudulent, from technically not feasible to manipulated, and a whole host of other conclusions. And not a single one has said, yeah, that's plausible. Nobody that was truly independent of this group has said it was a plausible narrative and that the data was good. So to my awareness anyway.
Yeah, and this group had financial incentives to make sure that that their program was effective, and that what didn't seem likely they were going to back off of their first big swing and go, yeah, maybe our system here isn't as magical as we think. No, of course not. They came out with this. They put it out there, and they weren't going to back off of it, and there was no one there to look over their shoulder or to error check them. And until it got to some of the cyber at FBI, to the CIA, and they were the ones that were going, no, this what they're giving us doesn't check out, or at least there's not enough information here to make the conclusions that they're so certain of.
Absolutely. And there's more information. Obviously, we kind of hit on it right off the bat. I mean, indications are that Rodney Joffe and some of these other researchers that worked at Georgia Tech that are involved in these Alpha Bank allegations, they appear to have other roles. Apparently, they went and worked for Special Counsel Mueller to some extent, and they provided work product on the DNC hack, including attribution work, is our understanding right now. So as that story breaks, obviously that's going to be a pretty big bombshell out there once the mainstream media actually catches up to us on that. And that's kind of the purpose of the show, because whenever that news breaks, I don't imagine the mainstream media is going to catch up to us within a couple of days. It's going to take us some time to really go through all the documents as we have. So whenever that news does break, you can definitely come back to this channel. We'll have a chat that night for sure.
Yeah, and I think we're really trying to gear up for whenever the Durham report comes out. There's going to be so much information so fast that people are, going to be wanting to have it distilled and have the documents put in front of them so they understand what's happening. And that's something we're really looking forward to be able to do. There's a ton of stuff we know that is there. Now, whether it comes out unredacted, whether it's going to be held as grand jury secrets, things like that, we don't know, but we should be able to fill in the gaps of a lot of that stuff. So just because the mainstream media may downplay things or not mention it at all, we'll be able to say, well, this is what we do know about that for a fact. Here are the documents. We'll show it to you.
Absolutely. And there's other things coming as well. Obviously, we have the binder of documents. It looks like it's going to be released relatively soon. Judicial Watch filed a lawsuit for that. And that could be out any day now. That could come out tomorrow just as easily as any other day. So binder of Russiagate documents, the John Durham report. I have some FOIA requests and lawsuits out there. I know some other people do as well. And any number of documents could come back to where it might be nice to have a chat. We'll be able to pull up a screen just like this and go through the documents line by line. We're not really talking about the document that I have up right now because there's only a couple points in here that were sort of interesting. Nothing really stood out. So obviously, if you want to read it, you can check out Charlie Savage's Twitter feed tonight, and there's a link on there. But there's nothing too crazy here if you've been following us for a while. So. MB, do you want to talk about the indictment?
Which indictment is that? Undead.
McGonigal.
Mr. McGonigal. Yeah, that name's come up a few times, and now he's very famous as of today for apparently working for a Russian oligarch's behalf, being paid a lot of money, not declaring it, and allegedly making some false statements and doing some things on documents as an FBI senior agent in the New York field office.
Yeah, I mean, I think he actually was indicted twice today, right? Because I think he's indicted out of New York, and then I think he got caught an indictment in the District of Columbia as well. And quite honestly, I haven't had the time to actually sit down and really break down the indictment, but sounds like he's in a heap of trouble. And I think what caught everybody, beyond the fact that he's got significant ties to Deripaska, he's obviously a big player in the whole Russiagate story. He was one of the first people that were kind of clued into the investigation as it really started getting off the ground. So I think a lot of people will have questions about when did this influence and this conspiracy actually start? Because certainly the indictment, I think, 2018, and then I think the DC indictment talks about August 2017, where they started some of their activities. But when did they actually establish contact? When did they start speaking? And was there some influence maybe going back a little bit earlier?
Yeah, and again, to kind of get ahead of the spin that we're hearing that this was a Trump kind of guy. No, that is not the case. Oleg Deripaska was the oligarch that apparently he was taking money from, or allegedly. Christopher Steele worked on that man's behalf, lobbying for him. So if we're doing guilt by association, Chris Steele, at the same time he was working to dig up dirt on Trump, was also taking money from Deripaska to dig up dirt on the guy that they say Deripaska is friends with. So none of these guys are good guys. I mean, when you kind of get down to it, at least in my opinion. So I think we're going to find out McGonigal was a Comey appointee and protege to some extent. He had some absolutely glowing words to say about Comey when Comey was fired. We have that in a transcript and on a YouTube channel. He was very upset the day he happened to be on stage giving a interview, and he was really upset that Comey had been fired and had a lot to say about it. So this guy was pretty, I guess, if you want to call him swampy, that might be a good description, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I like I said, I really haven't gotten a chance to really break down all these documents, but pretty interesting that he's got all these ties. A lot of people were asking about John Durham connections, and there's no indication in the indictments today that John Durham had anything to do with this indictment. It wasn't brought by John Durham. Certainly, I would imagine Durham was aware of it, but one of the things that we did pick up from the Joffe material was that it really appears that Durham is done. And there's been a lot of people that are kind of doubting that. And, they say, what's your source? And it's like, well, for one thing, in documents that I obtained in that civil case a few weeks ago, Joffe in his filings says that John Durham cleared him and said, we're not going to charge you in October. So the only reason he would tell Joffe that is either Rodney Joffe took a plea, or not a plea deal, but some type of cooperation agreement where he's going to testify against other people, which I don't see as likely at all, or Durham is done. And that's what seems to fit with the public reporting that originated around October. And for all we know, maybe Joffe was the source of that public reporting. But all indications are, especially with a couple of people from the Durham team leaving over the last 4 or 5 weeks, it looks like Durham's done. Don't really see what he might still be doing. I'm a little bit surprised, quite honestly, that we haven't heard about a report, because Danchenko trial wrapped up like mid-October, and we're still, we're heading towards February now, and we haven't heard about a report being finished and submitted yet. And I think we would, but I guess I'm not sure. Maybe it's been submitted. Maybe it's just going through redactions right now.
Yeah, I don't think we hear. Durham is famously tight-lipped and not allow leaks do not come out of his office. If he's wrangling with the attorney general about any kind of redactions, I don't think we'd necessarily hear about it. Maybe if the rubber hit the road and he felt like this needs to, become public because something wrong is happening, he would probably go to Congress. He probably would not run to a camera like some other prosecutors in the country.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be. I already feel a great deal of sympathy for him for what he's going to go through when he goes and testifies to Congress, which he no doubt will, because based on stuff that we know and stuff we were just talking about, Republicans are going to be furious, or at least they're going to make a show of being furious, because in his report, he's going to talk about, these same Alpha Bank researchers had a role in the DNC hack attribution. And that's just going to, set a lot of hair on fire in Congress, because that doesn't feel right. That doesn't make sense to a lot of people. And, if we get to see that part of the report unredacted, and there is somewhat of a chance that it is redacted and we don't get to see it, he's going to face a lot of questions about how and why he couldn't come up with conspiracy charges. Certainly with everything else that we know, it doesn't sit right, because we have Rodney Joffe, who is a confidential human source. We have at least one of his other associates that was a confidential human source going to the FBI around October 5th. We're not sure exactly who that is. And then everything else that they were doing and going on. And then the repeated, bringing of this information that really wasn't making sense and wasn't panning out, to continue trying to funnel that to the government. And then the government sort of in lockstep, working, for the same goals, whether it's not interviewing David Dagan, which they wanted to, and they didn't. And then he went on and worked for Special Counsel Mueller, or whether it's making Igor Danchenko a paid confidential human source to seemingly hide him from Congress and from FOIA. There's going to be way too many data points, and Republicans are just going to be laying into John Durham, I think, especially after taking this long and after, it's been like 3 years now. He was talking about predication. So I don't think Durham's going to have a fun day when he has to go testify.
Well, I think something really smart that the Republicans actually did, which is sometimes rare, is they've set up this select committee run by Jim Jordan that will theoretically be handling the Durham report, because it just isn't kind of their purview. And they've got all the security protocols. They have a SCIF they can work in. And I would assume they're going to be doing some interviews with John Durham behind closed doors. And there'll be public hearings for sure, but behind closed door stuff is probably where the real work gets done, because there's less grandstanding. You get this thing where each guy has 2 minutes to talk and they spend 1:30 talking about their district and how mad they are and blah, blah, blah. And nothing gets done. Well, behind closed doors, there's not as much of that. And I think that some of the stuff that he won't be allowed to talk about because of just its issues with secrecy, he'll be able to talk about in that context because it's already set up. And I think that is probably where the good stuff will come out. I think the main issue is is the congressmen have to be asking the right questions, and they may just not know which questions to ask. So if they hear us, we're here to help. I would love, I think there are incredible resources out here of guys that have been working on this for years, and they would all drop everything to help. So I am hopeful that the right information gets to the right people and the right questions get asked.
I think that's a great point. Yeah. I mean, hopefully they're going to ask the right questions. I know there's good investigators in Congress, but they don't necessarily have all the time in the world to track this sort of as we do. There's a lot more going on. Obviously, they don't have the free decision over what they do with their time. They're going to be tasked on different things. We have so many different scandals out there that would be dividing their time, and there's just so many different documents. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, to an extent that members of Congress or staffers might be listening in, absolutely. I hope they would reach out, and we might have a few good ideas as far as what questions to ask and try to get some answers, and hopefully would be able to see them subpoena not just talk to John Durham, but go and pull some of these witnesses and pull some of these subjects of interest before Congress. And if they, whatever the case might be, I don't care how they do it. I don't really want to make a big show of it. I really legitimately just want to hear some questions to them and see what they say, because reports can be difficult to read, but they can also leave out some of that, direct type information. And there's just going to be so many questions that come out of the Durham report. Whenever we see it, there's going to be just so many questions. There's going to be a lot of offshoots, I imagine. As we've kind of gone through this, there's so many offshoot type investigations that Durham is not going to get into. And that, that goes back to what we were talking about earlier too, like the data privacy and the data mining program. We have emails in our possession where Rodney Joffe, not only is he associated with the AlphaBank allegations, not only is he apparently associated with the DNC hack investigation and attribution, he is associated with some massive contracts with the federal government, including certain provision of data to the U.S. government, massive data analytics programs for the U.S. government. And that's just really alarming, right? I mean, how does he seemingly get connected to all these different stories? I'm gonna add Kingmaker back in here. And King, I mean, if you have any ideas or anything you want to mention as far as what you're expecting from the Durham report, or what Congress might or should be doing when they get the Durham report, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Right now, I'm in the position that Congress may have to pull some teeth from the DOJ to see the Durham report. Garland may put the clamps on it and keep it secret for a variety of reasons, and it may take some aggressive action by Congress to even see it. We'll just have to see. It's right now it's total speculation. I want to go back to one thing you said, Penguin. You go by Penguin or Undead. In talking about Jaffe suing New Star for his fees and those letters you've produced from the Georgia Tech people looking for Georgia Tech to pay their fees, one thing kind of jumps out. The individuals, Jaffe and the Georgia Tech researchers who were doing the attribution work for whoever, Mueller, the DOJ or the FBI, or just on their own to help Hillary, do not appear to have been supervised by the people they worked for. Neither New Star nor Georgia Tech had any control over what they were doing, and probably no knowledge of what they were doing, which raises a massive question. Like, who were they working for? Were they being paid on the side? Do they have exposure for using government data, either at the state level or the federal level, to try to take out a presidential candidate or a president? Those are legal questions that jump into my mind. And so far, only New Star has publicly taken a stand that it had nothing to do with what Jaffe was up to. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think 100% that some of these guys had side companies that were in the same business, basically. So you could argue they were using this as a jumping off point for personal gain. I don't know if that's true, but I know they had companies. The other thing, well, I'm thinking of it real quick, King. So we know that grand jury material probably won't or may well not end up in the public Durham report. But we know that David Dagon was a cooperating witness for Durham, and he would have testified in front of the grand jury. But he also would have assumedly talked to Durham, in personal interviews. If are those personal interviews still fair game if they're basically the same thing you told the grand jury?
Should be fair game if he did it outside of the grand jury.
That's good news.
But there may be other reasons, even apart from grand jury secrecy, that A.G. Garland will try to put the clamps on it and keep as much of it as possible confidential. Including that indictment today, or two indictments that came out today, are both intriguing because they clearly have ties back to Russiagate. This guy, McGonigal, how do you say his name?
I think that's right.
McGonigal, he had his hands in the Russiagate pretty early on. And Stephen McIntyre, Climate Audit, is pursuing a thread this evening that I read just before I came on here, suggesting that there could be a Hunter Biden tie to this guy as well. particularly he's referring to the DC indictment, which involves taking money when he was an FBI agent, taking money from Albanians and later some other East Europeans. And the Albanians have some tie that I have not traced yet, but it's worth looking at, to Albanian oil and gas resources, which, according to McIntyre, the CEFC, which was paying Hunter, was also interested in. So it kind of, it's a vast web that we could go off onto another tangent at this point.
Yeah, they're going to have to pick this apart because this guy was involved in a ton of this stuff. He would have been there in the New York field office when Anthony Weiner's laptop was being either sat on or finally discovered, depending on how you look at it, right before the election. So what role he had to play in that, I'm sure, is something a lot of people are going to want to know. Yeah, he was in right before he came to New York. He was in FBI headquarters in cyber, and received, I believe that he received a tip on the Steele dossier and was the one that kicked it up to the 7th floor. There's an email of his forwarding, which, you know, who knows how much that influence that had, if any, but, you know, that's, he was in a pretty powerful position to be able to send it up where it's going to get into McCabe or Comey's hands, or even Stroke. So this is going to take a long time to unravel.
Would he have had any involvement at all in Patrick Ho, the investigation, arrest, and ultimately plea deal? That's the Hunter's client, Hunter Biden's client, the spy chief of China, he called it.
He could have. Did he have a New York connection?
He was
Probably.
arrested he was indicted and arrested in New York.
You would think you would have to at least be knowledgeable of it.
So put that on your list, guys, to track down.
Yeah, it's another Where's Waldo guy. There's just so many of these guys that are just get their fingers in everything.
Yeah, there's a couple really interesting theories out there, and Walkerfire, I wish he was on, because he had some pretty interesting theories about some tie-ins that Hunter Biden might kind of have into some of these different players, and I bet he would have something better to contribute on that than I do, because I can't really make that connection, or maybe Stephen McIntyre if he hopped on. But
well, he just posted it this evening, so I have not looked at what he's looking at or tried to run it to ground, but he's on it, and it kind of piqued my interest.
When did McGonigal retire? Anybody get the?
Yeah, 2018.
Okay.
Don't have the month.
Yeah, I think it was in the fall of 2018. That's my understanding. Let's see here. Yeah.
But back to Russiagate, I wait and I wait and I wait for something from John Durham. Hopefully he.
I think we lost King.
Oh, King, well, I think he left the whole chat. I think he must have hit the X on accident.
Well, he'll be back. But I'm sure that we're all waiting on Durham. He's absolutely right. And there he is. And King's going to be invaluable. His legal expertise, as it has been. We've learned so much from him. There he is. Hey, King, want to finish your thought?
This app or something on my. I'm doing this with my phone, and it keeps popping in and out. So I apologize.
No worries.
But on Russiagate, what I was saying was, we just have to wait for whatever Durham comes up with. Hopefully, it's something meaty and substantive, and that he can get it out into the public. I don't see any evidence that he has anything still going legally. No more indictments. I think we're just waiting on a report.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have any thoughts as far as, how bad it's going to look that the same researchers tied to the Alpha Bank allegations are apparently responsible for the attribution for the DNC hack? I mean, let's talk about the Mueller case for a moment. So Mueller indicted 12 GRU agents for hacking the DNC. And from a Brady material perspective, if you knew that the attribution tying your clients to this alleged offense came from individuals that were tied to allegations like the Alpha Bank allegations, I mean, how would that play into your thinking, either both sides? I mean, as a prosecutor, as the government bringing the case, or as a defense attorney?
We don't know enough yet. I don't think we know that he was given white papers by the Georgia Tech people. We know that he had a redacted CrowdStrike report, not a complete one. I think it was called a draft even. We don't know what else he had, and we don't know how those all fit together, whether they were consistent or whether there were holes in one or more, and he decided to reject them and rely on somebody else.
Sorry, I was just sending out an email. But yeah, I think that's a fair point. Obviously, we're all waiting now. John Durham's been at it almost 4 years. They're just, a lot of people kind of look at this as like a pass fail. And if there's more indictments, then they say, well, Durham's done a good job. And if he doesn't do any more indictments, if it's just report, he's a complete failure, and all this has been worthless. And I don't see that as the case at all. John Durham started this so late in the game. I mean, after Mueller had been around for 3 years, finally John Durham was appointed and he started looking at this. But by then, anybody that had evidence that didn't want it to be found had ample time to get rid of it, obviously. And I think that's so challenging for Durham to try to make a case, when everybody's using encrypted communication systems and then they're deleting and wiping their phones left and right. It's going to be really, really hard to prove criminal intent.
Yeah, and I think that when the FBI was actively working against him in some respects, that certainly didn't help. He was really behind the 8 ball. Yeah,
I just put him in 10 minutes ago. Oh, that's from yesterday? I didn't take those out.
King's walking his dog. Yeah, but my thought is there's going to be stuff coming out with Durham's report that we have no idea. Like when the Jaffe stuff came out, it really, in a lot of ways, was out of left field. And I think there's going to be things that are just so off of our radar, and that's exciting because anytime something like that happens, we look back at everything we think we already know and put it in that prism, something new that has connections to all the things that we've already run down over and over again. So I think we'll be spending a lot of time looking at new things that we really can't even speculate about.
I agree. Is there anything else you guys, either one of you wanted to get into? I don't think we had to go crazy late tonight. Obviously, there's going to be a lot more to come. And this is sort of like an intro. There's a couple things that happened today where it gave us some justification to go ahead and do sort of an introduction video and sort of start building this platform. And then with this platform established, obviously, that's what we want to have in place. When we get into, Durham's report, get into the FOIA documents that are coming, that I expect actually pretty soon, and some of my stuff, and the binder of Russiagate documents and everything else that's going to happen over the next year. Having this platform is going to be really important. Being able to share those documents and walk through them together line by line is going to be great. And then we have a lot more speakers. I think there's probably 10 or 15 of us that have sort of been doing this together for a long time. So there'll be more and more people that kind of join us, and we'll do more and more of these. But I'm happy to stick around, MB or King, if you guys have anything else you guys want to get into.
I don't know. I do think this is a great platform, Undead, and I'm really glad you came up with it. I think we can do a lot of things with documents and put on some more multimedia kind of stuff. We saw this a lot in some of the other trials of, really when you get into legal stuff, it's great because you get these, filings and briefs and things, and you can really just, get the highlighter out, and the lawyers can explain it, and you can talk about exhibits. So I think that's exciting, and it just for people that are kind of visual learners like myself, I think it's really helpful to just look at the actual documents and go, yeah, there's no getting around it. Here's the proof.
I like the way you can see a document on this. This is really handy, very helpful. But I have nothing more to contribute tonight.
All righty. Well, we can go ahead and end it here. I really appreciate everybody joining us. I mean, if there's listeners out there, if you want to go ahead and we're not going to be a channel that begs you to like and share the stream every day, because we're not looking for monetization necessarily, but certainly appreciate social media shares, and especially as we try to establish a channel and make it worthwhile to have more and more speakers come on. And we'll certainly be looking to do more of these, and we'll try to do some pre-recorded videos. We get questions a lot about people like Seth Rich or Joseph Mifsud or a few other topics, and we can definitely go through and cover those. That's not a big deal. So Walk of Fire and MB, I think you and I, all of us, were talking about that the other night. So that'd be good. We'll certainly look to be doing some of that, and then whenever news breaks, we'll be here doing live streams. So with that, I think I'm going to end it here, and I will see you guys next time. See you guys.
Thanks. Good night, fellas.
Thanks. Good night.
Good night.